And all of the things that I was told in South Korea are not true. That have the architectural styles that South Korea is attempting to claim and steal. 大家好，我是 Shang Guan Jie Wen. We're here in Foxingmen near Shisa in West Beijing within the Second Ring Road, which is one of my favorite restaurants in Beijing. I want to talk to you about why I moved to China, why I moved to Beijing, some of the things that while I was living in America inclined me to move here. Now, I'm from San Francisco, not originally, but I've been living in San Francisco since I was about 20 years old. And San Francisco has a Chinatown that also played a role in it, because Chinatown had a certain je ne sais quoi, which is a French word or phrase meaning I don't know what. Chinese culture is absolutely fascinating because it grew so independently of Western culture. So it's got all of this civility, and its civilization is old and has all this complexity and dynamism and all of these differences with Western culture that makes it absolutely fascinating and interesting, because it's just as rich as the cultures from which I come, but completely different. And so part of it was China's economy is going to be absolutely massive, and part of it was that Chinese culture is absolutely interesting. So if you play chess or cards, you know that sometimes you make a move. You don't make a move in chess or in cards, in poker, whatever game you're playing, mahjong, for one reason. You make it for many different reasons in that game. It's part of the strategy. When I was thinking of moving to China, there were many different reasons that I wanted to move to China. I actually was tired of America. But China specifically, I knew that China's economy was going to explode. There's a famous magazine in America called Forbes magazine, and Forbes has been predicting that China's economy would eclipse America's by 2025 or 2030. And I knew that I came here, this was the new land of opportunity, that China was going to be one of the great and most powerful countries in the world. And that had a lot of, what to say about where I was going. I was thinking, well, China is going to be the power of the world in the future. I should go there. This is my favorite noodles in all of Beijing. Xinyu again. I put a bunch of laji out on the top because I like it really spicy, and there's some garlic here too. And we've got these plates of meat. And also, if you know some really great restaurants in Beijing, even though I've been here a long time, let me know on the comments below. I'll be happy to check them out. So initially, after I finished my master's degree, eager to move to China, I looked for jobs. But not knowing how to find jobs at the time in China, I didn't find anything that paid very well. So I did find some jobs in South Korea. So I moved to South Korea. And after I got to know some people, they told me that Confucius was from South Korea, and Sun Tzu was from South Korea, and that basically everything that's Chinese comes from South Korea. And they showed me a big map where Korea had once controlled all of Dongbei and parts of China, this huge map of Korea just taking over Asia. And they said, oh, this is from ancient times. So I left eventually. I left after 1 year, and eventually I moved here to Beijing, and I learned a lot more about Chinese culture and about real history, and I read lots of history books, not just produced in China, but also produced in other countries as well. And all of the things that I was told in South Korea are not true. It turns out Confucius is from Chufu. I went to Chufu. I saw his home. I saw where he's supposed to be buried. I learned all about where Sun Tzu is actually from, and I saw all of the ancient buildings here in Beijing that are more than 1,000 years old, that have the architectural styles that South Korea is attempting to claim and steal. So that was an interesting experience for me, in that a lot of the countries immediately around China, because they've been near China for so long, thousands of years, they've adopted a lot of Chinese culture, but the South Koreans claim that they invented it all. We've been walking south while we've been making this video. We're now in Xidan, one of the largest commercial districts in Beijing. A lot of foreigners go to Wangfujing because a lot of foreigners live on the western side of Beijing, which brings me back to my point. In 2012, I finally arrived here in Beijing, China. Unfortunately, not speaking very good Chinese, most of the friends that I made at that time were foreigners. And that's where I learned about something called the expat bubble. The expat bubble is essentially when foreigners only make friends with people who speak English or other foreigners. So after a while, I realized that this was the case, and I've been trying to make way more friends with Chinese people. So, as I was saying, a lot of foreigners who come over here, they're just trying to get a year abroad. A lot of these would-be expats only live here for a year or two, whereas when I came over, I intended on staying here. When I got here, different when I got in South Korea, I absolutely fell in love with the culture, and the culture is always deeper than I imagine. Every time I begin to think that I'm starting to understand Chinese culture at all, it turns out to be much more complicated and much more sophisticated, much more ancient than I'd ever imagined. So I arrived here in Beijing in 2012, and Beijing was a little bit different back then. You might not have been here around then, but all of the streets, the small streets, used to be filled with plastic chairs, and people used to be eating chuar everywhere. All of the side streets were filled with chuar at the time. Beijing smelled like chuar. Late at night, all of the young people, especially old people too, would go out into the streets and sit in these plastic chairs and order copious amounts of chuar and drink baijiu, shooting to each other gambe, gambe, gambe for a couple of hours almost every evening, but especially Thursday, Friday, and Saturday nights. Obviously now in 2021, Beijing has its advantages too, but most of that culture is now gone. So my adventures in China only began in 2012. And I've been able to travel throughout most of northern China during that time, having adventures along the way, traveling throughout Shandong, Shanghai, and other places, and I hope to travel to more places. I've probably been to more museums in Beijing than anyone I know, and I want to share these adventures with you. Now we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.